much. I'm honored to be here. This meeting confronts me in a very painful way with the limitation of being a philosopher. I cannot answer your probably implicit demand to provide solutions, or at least directions, what to do apropos the ongoing financial crisis. The task of philosophy is not to provide answers, but to show how the way we perceive a problem can be part of the problem, mystifying it instead of enabling us to solve it. There are not only wrong answers, there are also wrong questions. These wrong questions are what we call ideology. When we are dealing with a problem, which is undoubtedly a real one, ideology performs its invisible mystification. Say, tolerance designates a real problem. And I am, as a rule, asked when I oppose tolerance, but how can you be for intolerance towards foreigners, for anti-feminism, for homophobia, and so on? But therein resides the catch. Of course, I'm not against all this. But what I am against is today's automatic perception of racism as a problem of tolerance. Go and check Martin Luther King's speeches. The word tolerance is practically absent from them. For him, one doesn't find racism with tolerance, but with emancipatory political struggle, even armed struggle. So why are so many problems today perceived as problems of intolerance, rather than problems of inequality, exploitation, or injustice? The immediate answer lies in the liberal multiculturalists' basic ideological operation, the culturalization of politics. Political differences, differences conditioned by political inequality or economic exploitation, are naturalized and neutralized into cultural differences. That is, into different ways of life which are something given, something that cannot be overcome. They can only be tolerated. And incidentally, I think that the same goes for harassment. In today's ideological space, the very real harassment, rape, bigotry, is often reduced, intertwined with the narcissistic notion of an individual who experiences all proximity of others as an intrusion into his or her private space. Ideology is, in this precise sense, a notion which, while designating a real problem, blurs a crucial line of separation. And I think we should do the same apropos the financial meltdown. What can help us is the fact that the very term ideology intervened at the crucial moment of the debates surrounding the ongoing crisis. As probably a lot of you know, on October 23rd, 2008, Alan Greenspan, the non-partisan subject supposed to know, secret master of the long period of economic growth in the last decades, was submitted to a congressional hearing. In the climactic moment of this hearing, the US Representative Henry Waxman intervened, quote, "I'm going to interrupt you," he said to Greenspan. "The question I have for you is, you had an ideology. This is your statement. I do have an ideology. My judgment is that free competitive markets are by far the unrivaled way to organize economies. We have tried regulations, none meaningfully worked." That was your quote. You had the authority to prevent irresponsible lending practices that led to the subprime mortgage crisis. You were advised to do so by many others, and now our whole economy is paying its price. Do you feel that your ideology pushed you to make decisions that you wish you had not made? Greenspan's answer: "I found a flaw in the model that I perceived as the critical functioning structure that defines how the world works." End of quote. In other words, Greenspan conceded that when as he called it, once in a century credit tsunami has engulfed financial markets, his free market ideology shunning regulation was proven flawed. Later, Greenspan reiterated his shocked disbelief that financial companies failed to execute sufficient surveillance on their trading counterparties to prevent surging losses. Another quote from Greenspan: "Those of us who have looked to the self-interest of lending institutions to protect shareholders' equity, myself included, are in a state of shocked disbelief. End of quote. Shocked disbelief. Does this then mean that the financial meltdown will be a sobering moment, the awakening from a long economico-ideological dream? Well, it all depends on which ideological interpretation or story will impose itself and determine the perception of the crisis. When the normal run of things is dramatically interrupted, the field is open for ideological competition. For example, as we all know, in Germany in the late 20s and early 30s, Hitler won in the competition for the narrative which will explain to Germans the reasons for the crisis of the Weimar Republic and the way out of it. His narrative, of course, his plot was the Jewish plot. In France in 1940, it was Marshal Petain's narrative which won in explaining the reasons for the French defeat. It's not the failure of France, it's the failure of the Jewish Freemasons and so on. Corruption, so defeat by Germany is a unique chance for the restoration of French greatness, and so on. The danger is thus, I think, that the ongoing meltdown will be used following the lines of what Naomi Klein called the shock doctrine. Quote, "The history of the contemporary free market was written in shocks. Some of the most infamous human rights violations of the past 35 years, which have tended to be viewed as sadistic acts carried out by anti-democratic regimes, were in fact either committed with the deliberate intent of terrorizing the public or actively harnessed to prepare the ground for the introduction of radical free market reforms." End of quote. So, I think the danger is that the ongoing meltdown will also be used as a kind of intended or non-intended shock therapy, creating ideological conditions for further liberal measures. This already happened a couple of times when nobody expected it to happen. For example, some naive leftists claim that it is the legacy of the Cultural Revolution in China which acts as a counterforce to the unbridled capitalism, preventing its worst excesses, maintaining a minimum of social solidarity. What if, however, it is exactly the opposite that is the case? What if, in a kind of unintended, and for this reason, all the more cruelly ironic cunning of reason, the Chinese Cultural Revolution, with its brutal erasure of past traditions, was a shock which created the conditions from the ensuing capitalist explosion? What if today's China has to be added to Naomi Klein's list of states in which a natural, military or social catastrophe cleared the slate for a new capitalist explosion? There is even a further paradox at work here. There is, beyond all cheap jibes and superficial analogies, a profound structural homology between the Maoist permanent self-revolutionizing, the permanent struggle against the ossification of state structures, and the inherent dynamics of capitalism. I'm tempted to paraphrase here Bertolt Brecht's pun, what is the robbing of a bank compared to the founding of a new bank? What are the violent and destructive outbursts of a red guardist caught in the Cultural Revolution compared to the true Cultural Revolution, the permanent dissolution of all life forms necessitated by the capitalist reproduction? Today, the tragedy of the Great Leap Forward in China in the late 50s is repeated as the comedy of the rapid capitalist Great Leap Forward into modernization, with the old slogan, "Iron foundry into every village," re-emerging as a skyscraper into every street of Shanghai, and so on. Consequently, to put it in old-fashioned Marxist terminology, the main task of the ruling ideology today is to impose a narrative which will not put the blame for the meltdown onto